What's something you saw as a kid that looked harmless but if you witnessed it now it would horrify you? Until the age of 12 my grandma had custody of me. I used to sleep with her and she slept with a baseball bat next to her bed. It wasn't until I was much older that I realized she did it. Dad's friends wouldn't be able to do anything to me. Dad was a drug addict and drunk, and when he was out of prison he had all kinds of people in and out of the house. You would never know what would be missing the next day, often my Nintendo sad face. She did everything she could to protect me from God knows who, what, and I had zero clue. Edit, damn, this blew up while I was sleeping. Thank you so much to everyone for the support, smiley face. I am adding extra details to help understand the situation. My grandmother was born in 1914, had a third-grade education and was a housewife her entire life. She was already 71 when I was born. My grandpa died when I was 4 and it was just her and I. We lived in a tiny 2-bedroom house in a terrible neighborhood. It was paid off and that's all she could afford. She lived off of the Social Security death benefits from my grandpa and food banks. She couldn't just leave and go anywhere else. Also, for those suggesting she should have called the cops, cops don't do anything if you say, "I'm scared these guys will do something bad." Cops have to wait till something bad happens. She did her very best and raised my right. Now my father is back in prison, shocker, and is pissed at me for not letting the past be in the past and welcoming him with open arms. Meanwhile I'm a 2x college graduate with a great job, my own house and recently married. She definitely did something right. Unfortunately she died when I was 12. I'd give anything to be able to tell her how grateful I am to her for doing everything right. Your grandma is a hero. Watching my kindergarten teacher die of cancer. He just kept getting skinnier and paler and more exhausted and eventually he just didn't show up anymore and that was that. Didn't understand it then obviously. My grandma would save time by blow drying my hair when I was still in the bath. When I was young and my patents were away I had to sleep at my grandfather's. A sleepover that I always really enjoyed, because he spoiled me very much. I also liked the fact that each day my uncle came over for a few hours for some coffee. It was something I usually enjoyed. Because my uncle and I have the same weird name, so it created a bond between us. Years later the same uncle called my dad and my aunt and told them my grandfather had sexually abused him as a kid for 16 years. Every time he came by when I was sleeping over, it was to check if my grandfather didn't do something horrifying to me. Until now I never had the change to thank him, as he has a huge trauma and broke all contact with my parents. But when I realized that all that time he was there, just to protect me, I couldn't say anything for a few minutes. It hurted him so much to be there. If I would had known then, I would had get my stuff at my grandfather's and run away with my uncle. A male classmate of mine, age 10, bragged about having sex. He seemed to enjoy it. Now I realize he was probably being abused, but back then I just thought he was bragging. We had a swimming pool at our school and had swimming lessons. When we were 8/9 of a year old, my class was getting changed, and as my classmate undressed, she said, "I'm not a virgin, I've had sex," completely unprompted. Our teacher sent her to the head teacher's office and she got in trouble for lying. She came back to our classroom later that day in complete floods of tears, absolutely inconsolable. At the time I didn't think anything of it, nothing bad had ever happened to me in my life when I was 9. I didn't even have the concept of adults can sexually abuse children. But now I think the fact that she made this statement randomly, unprompted, whilst we were removing our clothes to go swimming, and the fact she was so inconsolable after getting in trouble, points to the fact that something was going on. It breaks my heart that the teachers didn't take it further or try and have it investigated. I told my mum years later, she's worked with abused children, and she said this was a definite red flag. My dad would sometimes act really weird, stumbling and falling around the house and saying bizarre things. I thought it was fucking hilarious as a kid, that he was just being goofy and silly. I now know he was high as balls on Percocet. Skeptical smiley face. Getting chased by a hippo while in a small motorboat. I was only like 8 at the time, but I thought it was very fun. Meanwhile my parents were basically shitting their pants. Edit, wow, this got more attention than I thought, lol. The context was my family hired a guy with a boat to bring us around the Okavango Delta. Calling him a guide would be generous, he was just a guy with a boat, and we got a bit too close to a lone male hippo. Chaos ensued. Had a jogger get hit by a car outside my house once when I was about 8 or 9. My nephew came running inside yelling at my parents and my sister to call the ambulance because he was bleeding pretty badly. I could even see him from our playroom's window and I wondered what he was doing lying on the grass. Turns out he was bleeding out pretty badly, deliriously yelling at my parents when they tried to help. Eventually, an ambulance came and picked him up, but my parents always told me he made it out okay. The day after, in the spot he was found, someone had put a lily in the grass in a vase. It took me longer than I cared to admit to figure out he died from the hit and run. My parents told me about me getting drunk at 2 years old when they left a glass of whiskey unattended. I was bumping into walls and falling down. The next day I was extremely pale and sickly looking. My grandmother was begging them to take me to a hospital, but they didn't because they didn't want to get in trouble. I'd always thought of that as a funny story until I told it to a coworker and she looked horrified and concerned. It was when my nanny and I role-played to be in a relationship, LMAO, an abusive relationship, mind you, I was 8 at that time. She'd kiss me on the lips and I'd sit on her lap, and it's really creeping me out now that I think about it. I was about 8 years old and I walked into a public bathroom and I saw 2 people holding small spoons slumped in the corner. I remember telling my mother afterwards and she told me they were tired after eating birthday cake. Edit, thanks for the gold. My dad had to eventually tell me the truth about heroin because I wouldn't shut up and was horrified that people would be eating cake on the dirty bathroom floor. We used to jump off our roof. First time hurt a little, but after a few times you learned how to land. Did it regularly and would try various items as parachutes to see if it slows you down any. I look at that height now and wonder how the hell we never broke anything. Kids' bones are more elastic, I guess. In my childhood, my neighbor often hired us to help around the garden. When I turned 10, he asked me to come up and help pick the green beans. I went up in some red shorts. While I worked at picking the beans, I happened to glance back at him. I saw this weird jerking motion in his pants. Since I grew up in rural Tennessee in the 70s, I had absolutely no idea what was taking place. I just turned away and continued picking beans. Picking green beans requires a lot of bending over, and I wore very short red shorts. You can figure out what took place, I don't need to spell it out. Edit, I'm a 58-year-old male. In preschool my classmate choked to death on a cheese stick. Those fucking fuzzy caterpillars that look all fluffy. Later as an adult I learned of their painfully menacing ways. When I was in high school I got off the bus behind a kid I had known since middle school. We were walking to go inside when he just suddenly collapsed in front of me, smacked right into the pavement and started seizing. I knew something was bad wrong, but I thought he would end up being okay. He died in the hospital the next day because of bleeding in his brain. I knew when it happened that it was really fucked up that I saw that, but I never realized how disturbing it is until I got older. Now it really makes me upset. I have memories of him from middle school and he was just such a sweet and kind kid. He died freshman year and they had a moment of silence for him at our graduation. It was very sad. That made me laugh, but it's not funny. When I was about 4 years old I grabbed an Australian brown snake and swung it around like a lasso. The second most venomous land snake. A bite from one of these is a certain death sentence for a child. Nice to meet you, Hercules. When I was a kid, I would go fishing with my dad quite often in the middle of the woods. One time, we heard what sounded like a woman scream. It spooked me, but not terrified, mostly just confused me. My dad was like, "You know what, I am starving. Let's head home." And we left faster than normal, but he acted normal. Years later, we were reminiscing about all the adventures in the woods, and I mentioned the weird scream, and he said, "Oh, yeah, that was a mountain lion." As soon as I hears the scream, I looked up and saw it looking directly at you from the bank. That's why we got the hell out of Dodge. I had no clue. Edit for clarity, I don't think it was hunting us. I think it saw us as a threat to its territory, and gave us a warning to GTFO. I think if we would have stayed, or panicked, it might have attacked. While mountain lions do sometimes attack humans for food, usually children, they're unlikely to waste the energy, especially if the child is with an adult. But if they are going to attack you for food, they obviously aren't going to warn you. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't take their cries seriously. Also, thanks so much for the awards. When I was in 6th grade a girl showed up to school with a Tinkerbell tattoo on her hip. In our child brains, we found this very mature and grown up that her parents had let a family member tattoo her. Looking back at it now, it's concerning that anyone would sign off on a tattoo for a 10, 11-year-old. Same thing happened at my school. In 6th grade a girl came to school and while changing for gym she showed off a big tattoo that said "Daddy's little girl" on her barely developed breast. She turned out okay, but you can still see the tattoo in pictures she posts on Facebook and I cringe just thinking about it. My town swim instructor would always make fun of the boys anywhere from ages 6 to 13 or so for wanting to change in the stalls, and not out in the main changing room area where he was with his clipboard. He was eventually arrested when a computer tech found child porn on his laptop when he took it in for some repairs, and thanks to the trial we learned that he was filming us with a little camera attached to his clipboard. Also, that he had been molesting a disabled boy that was in his care.